In 1979, two behavioral science researchers coined a new term: loss aversion. Now, maybe you've heard of risk aversion, which is simply a low tolerance for risk. And there are lots of rational reasons to be averse to risk, and everyone's aversion to risk is going to be unique to them. But I think loss aversion is more intriguing than that because it's actually irrational. Let me explain. Imagine I handed each of the people on this side of the nave $100 at the beginning of the day, along with a list of 10 tasks, and told you that for each task you failed to do, I would take away 10 of those dollars. But for the people sitting on that side, let's say I handed you that list of 10 tasks with no money and said that for each task you complete, I will give you $10. We'll call this group the keepers and this group the earners. Now, rationally speaking, these are the exact same proposition at the end of the day. Assuming, of course, you trust me to carry it out, as I've said. But the human brain doesn't think of it that way. It sees these two propositions very differently. And there have been studies similar to this in real life with merit-based bonuses for employees. And those studies have shown that the keepers are generally twice as motivated as the earners. In other words, in order to create equal levels of motivation for each group, one would have to offer the earners $20 per task instead of 10. Because apparently our fear of loss is twice as powerful as our desire to gain. So it's the end of the day, imagine, and everyone in the room has at least a few $10 bills. Now, if you took one of those $10 bills and flipped it over, on the back you'd see 4 words floating above the image of the U.S. Treasury building. Those words are, "In God we trust." What a fascinating thing to print on our money. It's like the money is talking to you. Yeah, I know I'm awesome, but don't fall in love with me, kid. And there are all kinds of opinions about whether we should even have those words on our money, whether we should be invoking God on our legal tender. But it's not the word God, but rather the word trust that I want to zoom in on right now. Maybe you noticed it opening up today's collect. Grant us, O Lord, to trust in you with all our hearts. And that's one way to think about trust, and there's lots of other ways to think about it too. For example, I often use the word trust as a substitute for the word faith. Yet another way to think about trust is laid out really well in our readings this morning. In Jeremiah's story about the potter and the clay, in the psalm about being knitted together in the womb, one of my favorite psalms, in the epistle about learning to let go of an important person in your life, and in the gospel about learning to let go of absolutely everyone and everything that might matter to you. And to me, these passages are all about trust. They are telling us that trusting in God means embracing change and transformation in our lives. And if we recognize, as the psalmist has, that we are shaped by God from the very beginning, then we should welcome God to reshape us throughout our lives. Just like the pottery in Jeremiah's story, we should know that the potter who made us can remake us into something even better than before. Now, when it came time to write this sermon, I knew I was going to need a change of venue to do it. So I got a latte and a table at an amazing little place called 3B's Pottery on Southwest Boulevard. Now, I don't have a screen and a projector here to show it to you, but I did post pictures of it on my Facebook timeline. And it's public, so you can go and see it there if you want. Beautiful little place. As I pondered these ideas from Jeremiah and Philemon and however you want to pronounce that, Philemon, and Luke, I pondered these ideas and I was surrounded by bold, jaw-dropping Mexican pottery called talavera. From tiny espresso mugs to huge flower pots shaped like owls, every piece was lovingly crafted by an artisan, from something dull and messy and even broken into a beautiful masterpiece. Imagine if the clay, that dull, messy, broken clay, had objected to the artist's vision. Could the clay have ever imagined what great things the artist had in mind for it? Of course not. But the point is that the clay doesn't have to imagine it. The potter is trustworthy. And so the clay trusts the potter, and the results speak for themselves. Anyone who visits 3B's can see for themselves how magnificent the potter's work is, and have a fantastic horchata latte while they're at it. Now, maybe we can believe on some level that God can form us and shape us in amazing ways like this throughout our life. But how do we actually open ourselves up to that kind of trust? I think that's where the passages from Philemon and Luke come in. They're telling us that trusting in God means detaching from all those things that seemingly bring us purpose or security or identity. Because all those things are finite. And you, like God, are infinite. Why should an imperishable soul like yours attach itself to so many perishable things? And that is what I hear Jesus saying in this really challenging gospel passage. Certainly, Jesus doesn't want us to be a bad son or a bad daughter, or a bad spouse or bad parent. But the truth is, we cannot find real transformation in our lives until we're willing to relinquish these attachments. We do not possess our children or our parents or our spouses, nor are we possessed by them. How much less can we be possessed by our things, our property, our vehicles, our stuff? Because, let's be honest, we like to say we own these things, but they usually end up owning us, don't they? But why should that be? You don't belong to people, we don't belong to people, and we certainly don't belong to things. We are God's treasured possession, each one of us individually and together. We belong to God. And when we come to this realization, sometimes it means relinquishing all of those things in our hearts. At the risk of putting a Disney song in your head for the rest of the day, when we are controlled by something, sometimes it means we have to let it go and stop defining ourselves by that thing. But other times, it means actually giving something up. Even if that something is essentially a good thing, quitting that hobby, selling that car, writing that check, whatever it is for you. And when Jesus asks people to give up their possessions, or in the most extreme case, to sell all their possessions and give the money to the poor, we tend to just think of what's being surrendered. We only think of the one side of the equation, the giving up side. And this is where our loss aversion comes in. Remember that from the beginning of the sermon? We can't imagine that the $100 we give up is as beneficial for anyone to gain as it is painful for us to lose. And to be honest, that's partly my fault. Because I haven't been telling the stories. Your generosity, the generosity of Grace and Holy Trinity Cathedral, the possessions that we relinquish may feel like an abstraction to you, but it objectively changes people's lives on a weekly basis. So let me close with one of those stories. This last Tuesday afternoon, about 3:30, I was looking at the clock to see how much time I had left in the day to work on this sermon, or to get it started, that is. And a phone call came from a woman in a desperate situation. Through her tears, she explained to me how her electricity had been cut off, and how she and her husband, along with their 6-year-old and their 3-year-old, had to walk to the library because their house was too hot. She had a job, but her husband couldn't find one. They had no vehicle, and their landlord, within an hour of their electricity being cut off, their landlord had threatened to evict them for that very reason. And they were trying to keep their little ones calm and entertained in the library while they worked furiously to correct the situation. Now, because of our clergy discretionary fund, I was able to call their utility company and pay the amount required to turn their power back on. Now, granted, it took over an hour, but we made it work. And during that hour, the mom fretted that her daughter would panic and start to lose faith in her parents. But as things began to look brighter, she noted that her child had fallen asleep on a giant teddy bear in the corner. And toward the end of the conversation, this mom started weeping again, but this time out of joy and relief instead of desperation. And to be honest, I was getting emotional too. She thanked me profusely over and over, but I pointed out to her that the people who really deserve her thanks are the parishioners I work for. They are the ones, I said, giving up their possessions, relinquishing their attachments, so that a family can sleep comfortably in their own beds tonight, hopeful that they will not be evicted, hopeful that things may work out after all, because of you all. When you let go of something, it can feel like it loses value the moment it leaves your hands. But in this case, it's the opposite. The money that might have been spent on any number of things, any number of good things, when given away, was converted instead to relief, to survival, and best of all, to hope. Converted from something finite into something infinite, the gain far outweighed the loss. And in this process, little by little, we become disciples. Amen.